I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee. The first item on our agenda is the minutes of the meeting of December 13th. Any corrections, discussion, or motion?
I have a motion for meeting minutes for December 13th. To move
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
That. Aye.
Motion carries. For consent item number 2, we have no cards on item 5. Is anyone here to speak on that? Because I will include that in the consent agenda. Well, we weren't going to hear it, Marvin. That's the street landscape maintenance. No. All right, then move that to the consent 2 and 5. Do I have a motion?
I move items 2 and 5.
Second.
A motion second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Items 3 and 4 are informational only. Do anyone have any questions, discussion? All right, that takes us to item 6, which is the telephone and data network replacement.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we have here today a team of folks from the Information Technology Services Department, the Finance Department, and also our consultant that helped assist with this process. I want to introduce all of you to our brand new Chief Information Officer Matthew Arve. This is his second week on the job, and so he's going to kick off the presentation and introduce the other members here of the panel for this presentation.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. I just want to express my excitement to be here with the City of Phoenix and work with you on technology projects. Today we have with me today is J.R. Simmons, the President and Principal Consultant of Com Group Incorporated. He has been working with the city over the past couple years through this procurement process. We have Jim.
Denise Olson from Finance.
Okay. So with that said, since JR has been helping us through the procurement process, I'm going to turn it over to him and let him walk us through a few of the slides.
Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you. You can see the brief agenda that we put up on this. We'll each take a little piece of this and step through it pretty quickly. The critical element is that the systems that we're dealing with are extremely old and past their end of life. There's no support from the manufacturers for them anymore, and that puts the city at great risk. And of course, those risks could be easily categorized in different ways, but if we have a system failure, it could be catastrophic. There'd be no way to recover in any short period of time. And therefore, we'd have things like revenue loss, and the bad press alone would be terrible. So it is important that these systems be replaced to reduce risk is the first and most important business need. But along the way, there's also an opportunity to gain some efficiencies, increase the reliability, and get some new modern communications tools out of it. So as we started this project, although reducing the risk to the business was the first and most important element, it was not the only thing that we were trying to accomplish. As you can see, we wanted to provide modern communications. So systems this old, there's a lot of development and capabilities that we're not taking advantage of. Being able to do things like using mobile phones, tablets, computers for communications instead of just the old desk phone, that alone, that type of mobility for all the employees that are not chained to a single place, a single desk, is an important factor. We'll also be able to provide more modern communications tools by integrating with things like Office 365, Skype for Business, the other productivity tools that are part of the normal city operation on a day-to-day basis. It allows us to do a better job serving the residents, increases productivity for the employees as well. So we're looking at a series of things that will improve both the function and the flow of communications, as well as reducing risk at the same time. And then one of the biggest changes is state-of-the-art contact center, because contact center is one of those areas where these had some of the most significant change in the communications technology. And our water department call center alone processes over nearly 600,000 calls a year. That's 2016 stat. And they're responsible for about $750 million in revenue. So that one department alone, their call center has a huge impact on the city's operation. But we have contact centers throughout the city, and they're two separate systems today. They're not integrated. We can't transfer calls between them. There's a lot of problems with it. So being able to extend and streamline those same advanced tools to all city departments is one of the enhancements we'll be able to pick up. It also allows us to use new capabilities, improvements in self-service where it fits, and provide better information to the people that manage the call centers so we can do a better job. And again, increase productivity so that we're more efficient and make the most use of the employees and the staff that work in these call centers. In general, the project schedule looks like this. One of the key steps that we need to do is to fix a cabling problem here in City Hall, and we're scheduled to begin that process in March. But the rest of the project is on a schedule that will take almost a 2-year cycle to complete because of the complete nature. We're touching every single location with the data network, every single location with the telecommunications system. The unified communications will be used by every user. So there's just a lot. We're talking about approximately 18,000 ports in the system that will be migrated through this process.
I will cover the procurement process. As a reminder, this was a re-procurement. So we released the procurement. We did a significant rework on the scope of work, working with ITS, Law, and our consultant. It was released in June. We did receive 13 proposals. Obviously, we had a consensus review. The sessions were held in November. We shortlisted the proposers for presentations. We completed the BAFO process on December 15th, and we had the final consensus recommendation held on December 20th. Those are just some dates for you guys. Here's the data network portion of the proposal, the overall weighted evaluation results. As you can see, we had 6 proposers as part of the finalist group, and the WWT is the recommended vendor, scoring 713 points on this section. On the unified communication, we had 3 vendors as part of the finalist group, and as you can see, WWT was also recommended at 691, and then the other vendors were listed there accordingly. And then Denise will cover the financing piece of this.
Thank you. So we're requesting to ask for authorization to issue excise tax obligation bonds, and we will not exceed the amount of $35.6 million. And this money will be used to reimburse the cost of the project.
Do you do that over time in phases as progress is being made, or how is that done?
Yeah, so Councilwoman Williams, what we'll do is we will issue probably, I mean, we'll still work out all the details, but we're probably going to issue the excise tax bonds in one lump sum. And then we will do that so that we have enough time to pay off the project over the next 5 years, but still meet all the financing requirements.
So as far as our recommendation, we recommend the T&I subcommittee and City Council approve the contract award to WWT in an amount not to exceed $26.8 million. We are asking for an exception to the limitation of liability in the city code. We're working with the law department for no more than 4 times the contract value. The contract is, we also did another process to recable, for instance, City Hall. And we're asking the contract for that not to exceed $3 million for related network cabling using a state contract cooperative that exists currently. So we would issue an ordinance to issue excise tax obligations not to exceed 35.6 to reimburse all the entire project costs.
I know that this has been under discussion and underway for years. Because of our obsolete system. I am delighted to hear that you are going to have the entire city on one system. I think it's way past time. I take it that we haven't had objections to issuing this, or any valid ones, at least?
I did receive a protest on the 7th day of the protest period, but working with law and ITS, we've responded. The protest doesn't have any merit. They were protesting option items,
Oh, okay.
not requirements.
Okay.
So we've responded, and today is their deadline for filing for a hearing, but we haven't heard anything from them, so.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Motion?
I'll just also mention that that's a big number for anyone who's tuning in and watching. You know, 30, and they hear $35.6 million. That's a big number. That's a big city. And what we have to keep in mind, I think, Councilwoman Williams, you hit the nail on the head when you just said obsolete. That this system is nearly 30 years old. And for any of us who, you know, who have any type of IT infrastructure in our home, and I think most people do, and that's just in a residence, you know, chances are it's not that old. And so can you imagine running a small business or a large business, and can you imagine running a network that is right here in the 5th or 6th largest city in the country? So, so it is nearly 30 years old. I would say it is obsolete. In fact, the reason we're having to move with this, and we should have done this sooner, but the reason we're having to move with this is because a lot of these parts aren't even available by the manufacturers. So over time, it would actually be more costly by not doing the responsible thing and investing in our infrastructure as we move forward. So this is something that absolutely has to happen as we continue to move Phoenix into this, you know, futuristic city. As we continue to ask the private sector to invest in this city, we also have to show that and you've been a big champion in this, Councilman Williams, but we have to continue to invest in our infrastructure. Well, any world-class city, this world-class city is a world-class city because we invest in infrastructure and education. And we have to continue along that path, and this is an example of that, so I am supportive.
Are you making a motion?
Motion to approve staff recommendation.
And do you have any comments you'd like to make?
I do. I think it's slide 4. I think it's slide 4. It is mentioned in there, that's not it. Maybe, I don't know. It's mentioned in one of these slides about increased productivity. Could you please explain how you document increased productivity?
It's a very good question. The increase in productivity, as anybody who's ever tried to measure it, is not a simple thing. Sometimes even when it's intuitive and you know it's happened, it's hard to put a number to it. However, there's some clear ways that we can see it. For example, all the mobile staff that today have to wait sometimes hours in order to get a message or get back to people because the system is contained only at the desktop level and hasn't been extended. Or in some cases, it's as inefficient or as efficient as being able to see the status of all the team members on your project with one click of a mouse button going to that person and opening up a call or a communications, whether it's text or call. Those little things that take a few extra seconds or in some cases a couple extra minutes to find the right phone number completely add up when you're talking about a city of over 15,000 people. So trying to take all those individual moments in time, the savings and the productivity improvements are hard to quantify on the large scale, but they're very easy to see at the micro level and the day-to-day individual jobs. And where we see especially a lot of improvement is using the advanced tools within all the contact centers and the main department numbers, because today the system is so inefficient that our ability to get to calls and service the residents is a problem compared to using the new tools, which do a better job of queuing, giving better information to the managers so they can right size and not have employees sitting around not working when they need to be on the calls when there's peak periods as opposed to when there's silent periods.
So it sounds like we would be able to manage, these tools will help us manage our time more efficiently.
Yes.
And be able then to look at a log and for me, it's all about documentation and data.
Yes.
And being able then to see where we are and where we're not and where we need to increase, where we need to become more efficient. And so
Yes.
that's what I'm hearing from you with
Yes.
this new system.
Yes, managers will have better information, better tools to make better decisions, and individual employees will find it more efficient to do their individual jobs.
So if I'm an employee out in the field, how will I be able to use my cell phone to be able to then, because I'm hearing that there's two different systems, or there's not the capacity to use the cell phone out in the field versus the current system of sitting at the desk and being able to get calls.
Right. So the new system, when you call the desktop telephone number, it can simultaneously ring somebody who is sometimes mobile or all the time mobile. If they don't answer it, it's still a city system. We haven't turned it over to the cell phone. So you don't end up with voicemails in your personal cell phone voicemail box. They're still within the city system. And if you need to place a call, you can place a call so it looks like it came from the system instead of from your cell phone. So you're not giving out your individual cell phone number. We can also put clocking around that, so those features are only invoked during business hours, so that people that are under contract staff or unionized or whatever approach are not then put on a virtual on-call 24/7, and yet they still have the benefits during the day when they do need it.
Okay, thank you. Second.
Thank you. I have a question. As you cable City Hall and as you put the system in, are you going to wait until the entire system's in to activate it, or are you going to do it as you go?
Very good question as well. No, there will be definitely a phasing to it. We'll start out with the core will be stood up that will be able to support the entire city, and then we will cut over departments as they're able to. Because we have to fix the cabling here in City Hall would not be the first group to get new services because we have to get the cabling fixed first, whereas other departments, they're already cabled. But there will definitely be a phasing of departments that go into the new system. The two systems will be integrated to each other so that you will be able to call between them even as people are being migrated over.
Okay. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you very much. We're very eager to have this happen.
Welcome to Phoenix, Matthew. I like your haircut.
Item 7, groundwater management update. We talk about wells.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Catherine Sorensen, Troy Hayes, and Brandy Kelso are here from the Water Department to give you a presentation on this item.
Good morning, Chairwoman, council members. Thank you so much for having us. Before we launch into a conversation about groundwater, I want to talk really quickly about our water conservation efforts because it's an important component of all of our infrastructure and demand planning. Of course, anytime that we look at how we're going to ensure a 100-year sustainable and resilient supply of water, our first go-to is water conservation. Our water conservation efforts began in earnest in the 1980s, and we have since that time really pursued a strategy of changing the culture here in the city of Phoenix to make sure through education and outreach that our customers understand the value of water and really embrace a desert lifestyle here in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. That strategy has paid off very well for us. Our residential consumption on a gallons per capita per day basis has fallen about 33% in the last 20 years. And we're currently serving about 400,000 people with the same amount of water that we used 20 years ago. So we're really proud of that. In 2016, we were in 124 classrooms with children, teaching them about water conservation, stormwater, and the water cycle. We were at 69 community classes, educating people about Xeriscape and how to use water wisely. And we appeared at 127 community events. It's something we take very seriously, and we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish in terms of water conservation. But really, the story that we need to talk to you about today has to do with plumbing. Even though we expect that our water conservation efforts will continue, and that our customers will continue to save water and use less and become more efficient in their homes and in their businesses, this really is a story of making sure that we are able to move water where it needs to go and make sure that it's available where it needs to be at the exact time that it's needed. And that's really a story of groundwater. Our system, for the most part, is built on surface water, and we've relied on surface water for the last 30 years. But as we see Lake Mead levels continue to decline, as we expect shortage on the Colorado River to come, it's really important for us that we plan also for the black swan that we talk about a lot at council and for worst case scenarios. So Troy Hayes, our assistant director, is going to talk us through how what groundwater means in that regard and how we're going to plan for those scenarios.
Thanks, Catherine. As you recall, City of Phoenix adopted a strategy in the 1980s that we are going to be predominantly a surface water system. And so that means, like I said, 98% of our water that we deliver today becomes from renewable surface water sources from the Colorado River or from the Salt and the Verde rivers. What we use groundwater for is for drought mitigation, for those extreme droughts when we have to start pulling our groundwater out to supplement the supplies of surface water when they're not there, and also for reliability and system outages. And so as we have power failures or you have other things, plants coming online and offline, we use the wells then to supplement that supply when those are out. This slide basically says we have a whole bunch of groundwater. And so to put it in perspective, we have 3.7 million acre feet of groundwater that we have legal rights to. That's about 10 years of total supply for the City of Phoenix, or 25 years for the Colorado River supply, which is in a little bit of stress right now. But we do have a little bit of restrictions on being able to get that. Currently what we have is 23 active wells spread out through the city, but predominantly up in the northern section of town. These wells can produce about 48,000 acre feet. The new groundwater management plan, which we've finishing up, is recommending that we drill 21 new wells over the next 10 years, and this will more than double that capacity at being able to get at the groundwater supplies that we have. This is all in conjunction with getting ready for the drought that if it continues on, they'll be able to then pull that water source out and deliver it to the areas of town that need it. This would also be in conjunction with other infrastructure that we have. There are some pipelines and pump stations that we'd have to be able to move water around. Like Catherine said, we have enough water. We have an abundant supply of water, and with groundwater, it's the ability to move it to certain areas of town and to get at it when we need to get at it.
Could you describe that briefly?
Yes, which one?
How you move the water?
Right, and so essentially, and if you recall, is we're set up in pressure zones, and so we have different pressure zones as we go up north through Phoenix with different elevations. And so it's this ability to move from one zone to the other zone. And so where you may have a treatment plant down towards the Metro Center area or towards the Biltmore area, well then how do you then get water up towards Anthem kind of area? Historically, what we've done is built treatment plants up there. So we put the Lake Pleasant Water Treatment Plant, or we put the Union Hills plant, which can then bring water south. And so it's this ability to move different water sources from the north or from the south and to interchange those water sources when needed. And so if there is a restriction on the Colorado River side because of lack of resources, how do we move the resources that we have in the south north to replace those supplies? And then conversely, if there's a challenge on the Salt and the Verde side, how do you move those resources south? And so it's that infrastructure and moving it up and down in the water system.
So if I have this clear, if you have a well up north, you can send it south to a treatment.
With groundwater, essentially what we would do is it would just go right into the system. It would have a somewhat localized treatment, whether it has arsenic or whatever issues that it has. We treat it there on site. It then goes into the system.
the well?
Yes, at the
Oh,
wellhead
okay.
treatment. And so the water treatment plants are really for the surface water and treating those.
Require more than the wells.
Different. I would say it's different. Under regulations, if you pump the groundwater out and it meets all the federal and local regulations, it can go right into your system. We know that as we have surface water, we have turbidity and we have other things that we need to remove that are constant.
But I also know some of those north wells have some,
Right. The experience that we
Undesirables.
have, right, and the experience that we have is, you go back in the 1980s, we had lots of wells, and Phoenix has made a decision as we use surface water, as the regulations have changed for arsenic and nitrates and other things, we've abandoned wells, we've gone away from those. And so now it's going back and putting those back into service, either new wells in a similar location or different wells, and then going along with the treatment strategies that go along with that groundwater and being able to get at it.
okay, I'm still not clear.
Yeah,
You've got Anthem.
yes,
You want to pump water north to Anthem.
Right.
And it comes out of a treatment plant now.
right.
If you don't have the treatment plan and you're going to do it from a well, does the same pipe Does it feed
Correct,
into the
it's all
same
the
pipe
same
and
piping and all
you
the
just
same
pump it there?
infrastructure, all the same infrastructure that we would use for surface water as well as groundwater.
Okay, got it.
So, Councilwoman Williams, if I can clarify, so within our system, we almost function like the human blood circulatory system does. We have major arteries, those are our transmission mains, and then we have smaller mains that feed individual homes. And so it's a combination of the use of those large transmission mains, those large arteries, and then the smaller pipes that function like smaller veins. It works a lot like a human body does. So whether it's surface water going into those arteries and then eventually into the smaller pipes, or whether it's groundwater, it functions the same way. It's a matter of placing those wells exactly where you need them to fit into that circulatory system, if that makes sense.
Okay. And the aquifer is large enough to handle all this?
The aquifer is large enough to handle all of this. We do know that we have, as Troy said, we do have some water quality challenges up north, potentially arsenic, some nitrates, but those are all things that we can treat for and clean before they go into our distribution system to make sure the water is safe. And we have very good legal access to the groundwater as well.
Good, thank you.
All right, so our existing well program over the next 10 years, we had about $60 million budgeted. We're going to be moving another $90 million in to bring up the total well program to about $152 million. There again, we'll be adding those 21 wells and more than doubling the well capacity with this new program. And with that, we can take any further questions.
Questions, comments? You do?
Yeah.
Councilwoman?
So my understanding, and it may not be clear, and so I need some clarity, is that we actually are doing really well with our wells and preserving water. And so I'm hearing now we're adding 21 new groundwater, 21 or 20? 21.
21.
21 new groundwater wells because we're anticipating that we're going to need more water, there's going to be a drought, or what are we preparing for?
So, Chairwoman Williams, Councilwoman Pastor, it's a really good question. Let me clarify. So, in the 1980s, when the city of Phoenix made the choice to go to a majority surface water system, they did that, as you said, very intentionally to save that groundwater for future generations. And that's exactly what we've done. But it was also with the idea that we'd save that groundwater for times when it was really needed, times that surface water supplies were under a large amount of stress. And that's where we find ourselves today. Snowpack in the upper basin on the Colorado River looks really good right now, knock on wood. And we hope that we get a good year on the Colorado River. That would be very helpful. But the overall trend over the last 15 years has not been good. And levels in Lake Mead continue to decline. And if they continue to decline, we do expect that there will be a shortage declaration on the Colorado River here in the next couple of years. So it is exactly for that contingency that we're building up our well capacity to make sure we have reliable supplies.
Thank you. And then my next question is, you're asking for an additional $92 million. Where is the Water Service planning on generating this additional funding, or where's the $92 million coming from?
Right. So, Chairwoman Williams, Councilwoman Pastor, it comes from a combination of sources. So, we have a very large capital improvement budget. We expect to expend about $1.5 million over the next 5 years on various projects, rehabilitation, replacement, new infrastructure, the like. So what we do is every year we go through a process where we reprioritize where that money gets spent, and then we bring that forward as part of the City Council budget process. We ask the City Council to approve the total authorization for our capital improvement program. And then in the fall, if you'll recall, we come forward to this committee and explain our capital program, the priorities, and where we expect to spend that money. And then when individual projects are ready, we bring them forward for individual approval at the City Council level. So to answer your question, the $92 million comes from a combination of sources. Some of it will be existing money that's in our CIP that gets reprioritized. So for example, we'll program a lot of money for inspection of major transmission mains or major sewer lines. And we'll program a fair amount of money because we don't know what we're going to find. And oftentimes, as we go through and do that inspection, we'll find where we may have programmed, let's say, $10 million for that inspection and rehabilitation, it turns out the pipe's in great shape and we only need a couple $1 million. So if you can imagine over a $1.5 billion program, a lot of things get reprioritized and a lot of money becomes available then for other priorities. So it'll be a combination of that. The other thing is that just this last fall, with the help of Denise Olson in the finance department, we were able to refinance a significant amount of our bonds and save $107 million in net present value between the water and wastewater program. So we have some savings that we can rely on too. All of this comes forward in a package for a rate recommendation, as you guys are familiar, every fall to this subcommittee so that you can see exactly where those dollars are coming from and any associated rate impacts.
So I'm hearing it's coming from capital improvement budget. 1.7 million was coming from the refinance bonds, and then the rates.
I'm sorry, let me clarify. We have about $1.5 billion total programmed over the next 5 years for our entire capital improvement program. So some of it will come from savings of other projects that now maybe aren't necessary or are reprioritized.
Reprioritized.
Exactly. And then, no, our savings in for bond refinancing between the water and wastewater departments was $107 million. I believe, I'm sorry, I can double check for you. I believe of that, the net present value savings for the water utility was $30 million. So all of this comes forward as part of our 5-year financial plan that you guys see every fall.
Okay, so then from the combo of all of those areas, meaning capital improvement, refinancing of the bonds, and rates, that's where the $92 million will be coming from for the 21 wells over the next 10 years?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
My other comment, I'm sorry, Felder, I have a lot of questions. My other comment is that conservation. I happen to be talking to one of my really good girlfriends in California who lives in Arizona, and we started talking about the drought, the Colorado River and everything. And I said, I'm just curious, what does California do regarding water and conservation? And she says, oh, Laura, it's pretty strict here, and we have a great policy that we plan for. And so I understand that we're go into the classrooms and we educate and we influence the youth on conservation of water, but I really think it comes down to parents' behaviors and the behaviors of how we use our water. And I will say that at times, when in the morning when it's cold, we're told, highly encouraged not to run our water, but I run it because I want warm water when I jump into the shower. I do have solar panels that heat it really fast and make sure I'm not wasting any type of water. But I really think we need to up our conservation program and really starting to look at what is it going to look like in the next 15 years regarding our water, and really starting to talk about what it's going to look like in the next 15 years. It's not that other organizations haven't talked about it, but we haven't changed the behavior of how we use our water. We have incentives to have maybe the desert, landscaping. Some people have pools. I don't know how that all works out, but it all impacts our water. And so I think that we need to start or take a leadership role in starting to say we need to take a larger leadership role in the sense of conservation of water. But those are my comments. Thank you.
I want to congratulate you, because when you read in the paper or see on the news, all these other cities, especially toward the Midwest and East Coast, who have not maintained a solid infrastructure or program. And I am very proud that the city of Phoenix has been on this from day one. You continue, we know it's expensive, but in the long run, it saves us money. And because we don't have to worry about the quality of our water, we don't have to worry that water's going to be there when we turn on the tap, because of your forward planning and all that you're doing. And I just want to say thank you. I think it's courageous, and sometimes when you have to come and say $1.5 billion, granted, it's over a long time span, but nevertheless, it shows a continuing conscious effort to continue to improve our system, make sure it's safe, and ample supply as we continue to grow. And I think it's also extremely important that we send that message out across the nation, because when you're going to bring a new business or you're going to move a business, you want to make sure that there's going to be water there, safe water, and we have it. And when you look at so many of the other cities that do not, who are really, really struggling with this, I think it's something we should be bragging about. So thank you. Councilman, did you?
Yeah, I just want, this kind of goes in line with the previous topic of, of IT, but this is also infrastructure. And as far as I'm concerned, this is a responsible vote. It's a responsible thing to do, and we're in this good state of where we are with our water infrastructure, because the majority of the council, of previous councils, have made these responsible investments. And it's kind of like, when I think of the freeway system, someone had to take those courageous votes to start that project, and for generations to come, we are all fortunate, and we're glad that they did it. And so this is definitely one of those decisions that I think people have to make to continue to invest in our water infrastructure. And you don't have to look very far. I mean, my thoughts and prayers are with people in Flint, Michigan. But, there's an example that they're still dealing with. And it's going to be a very, very costly, I'm sure, example for that city. And more importantly, it's all about the health of people who are actually living in that area, who consume water, and so on and so forth. So this is a responsible vote. Thank you for bringing it forth. And I'm also and I want to thank you, Councilwoman, again. You've been the champion for infrastructure, and in particular water infrastructure. So again, I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm supportive.
Thank you. We do have one card, Diane Parker.
Thank you, Chairwoman Williams and committee. And I'm typically always in support of what Catherine Sorensen did. I've had the pleasure of meeting with her, and I think the things that you, the Chairwoman, and she are trying to keep the system so that it's in good repair is something that's fundamental. Any city, it needs to have good, accessible water, and certainly a desert city like Phoenix. And so I am in support of this. I don't know the locations of all these wells in the city of Phoenix, but I'd like to still expand on the project, which I am so in favor of your education and you being a teacher, Pastor, and if you could put a staff with me for the Phoenix Convention Center to make the city of Phoenix a place that is really viable downtown. We need to cool it down. Not only does it need to be cool where people want to come and join in the activities, and because we're in competition with other areas for entertainment, but Meet Me Downtown isn't going to get it unless it's cool year-round, temperature-wise. And so we do this a lot with water. This is a natural. We have water running all under this building that's cooling down chillers from Bank One Ballpark. And the convention center has a project. To Mr. Babcock, I never met him, but he was here in the water department when you've been here. And that I learned today that project's really kind of on standstill because it was made for the condensation of the water, the air conditioning system. And so that's producing only in the summer. So these plants that are watered by aren't getting that. And then the way they did it, it doesn't have soil. So guess what? Why don't we get the high school bioscience to make an innovation so that all around, I drove all around the convention center, and where they have these plants, they're not living, and let's make this project viable and have the field trips from schools to come down and see it, okay, and be a part of it. Thank you.
I think it's interesting because I think we've all noticed the plants around the convention center, and that the system wasn't working, so.
But we can make it work,
Yes,
and
we
let's
can.
have a
Here's-
competition with the school children to draw things. That's where it all starts.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you. Councilman?
I would just also, I meant to do this because this is such an important point, but Councilwoman Pastor makes an excellent point on the education piece. And the city of Phoenix has done a lot, and other organizations have done a lot. Our, partnering utilities have done a lot. But as much as possible, we have to be proactive. I mentioned a municipality that's dealing with some major issues right now, and now they're being reactive. The City of Phoenix so far has done well because we've been so proactive, but leave it to an educator to talk about the importance of actually educating, the people of Phoenix, people who consume water and who care about this place, of just conserving and doing the right thing. So as much as we can do on that, I think that's also incredibly important. I would argue it's most important, frankly.
Do I have a motion?
I move item number 7.
Second.
I have a motion to approve staff recommendation.
There's no action.
Oh, there's no action? Well, we're eager to make
approve
this
it anyway.
happen. Doggone it. Thank you. I think you're still up.
We're still up, yeah, thank you.
We're going to rehab everything, right?
Yeah, basically, that's absolutely correct, Councilwoman Williams. So let me introduce Amy Conroy. You've seen her up here before. She is one of our very esteemed engineers. She runs our entire water engineering group. She has a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge in the water utility here in the city of Phoenix. She is going to go through what we do to make sure that our concrete reservoir and steel tank program runs smoothly. Basically, these are storage facilities that help regulate pressure across the system. Troy was talking earlier about pressure zones, helps make sure that we're regulating pressures across the system, we're able to meet demands, and really importantly, that we're able to meet demands when we have fires, which obviously draw a tremendous amount of water on our system all at once. So she'll go through that and explain our program for how we maintain those.
Good morning. Like Catherine said, we are here to talk about our concrete reservoir and steel tank rehabilitation program within the City of Phoenix water services or water system. So why do we need storage? Storage basically helps us maintain hourly differences between water production and customer demand. People use water in the morning, they use water at the night, but we treat water all the time, and usually in a very relative way. So a consistent way. So storage allows us to store that water until it's needed for a variety of things besides peak demand, but also fires, as Catherine said. Once again, it provides extra water for fire emergencies, and it helps us maintain pressure. So what do we have? This is a steel tank. I'm racking my brain about which one this is, but this is one of our steel tanks that was newly rehabilitated. Our steel tanks range in size from 100,000 gallons of water to 5 million gallons of water, but they're usually up on mountainsides. You see them from North Mountain as you drive down 7th Street. That's a perfect example of a steel tank. And then we also have concrete reservoirs. This is our Hedgepath Reservoir, which is located up in the hills. You can't even see it from 101, but it's about 101 and 49th Avenue, and it's hidden in a little hill and was actually built into the rock. So those are the two types of reservoirs that we have. What we've done over the years is developed a very here's our reservoir system. Sorry, I don't even know my own presentation. The yellow circles are our steel tanks. We have a variety of them, like I said, from 10,000 gallons to 5 million gallons with a total storage of about 41 million gallons. And then we also have 23 concrete reservoirs, which are the red triangles, from 1.5 million, I think that's over in Ahwatukee, to 40 million, which is at our treatment plants, for a total of just under 400 million gallons of storage. So as I said, we have slowly developed a very proactive system of looking at our tanks. We started in our steel tank system because they have a tendency to deteriorate more quickly. So we started to refine this approach where we actually do a 3-phase system where we do initial inspections to kind of get an idea of where all the tanks are as a whole, and then do some prioritization. Then we do detailed inspections to help us develop which ones we're going to do next, and then we do rehabilitation, and then we re-look at them right before we're done with our construction warranty to touch up any of the problems that we have. We started this approach in steel tanks in 2012 and have modified it for concrete reservoirs this past year. One of the reasons that we've modified it for concrete reservoirs is we don't need to go in as often. Concrete's a little bit sturdier. There's not as much corrosion as there is in steel, so we look at it on more of a 5 to 10 year basis instead of 3 to 5. So now I'm going to show you some of the things that we found. Some of you have seen these pictures before. This was actually in a concrete reservoir. You can see all the corrosion from the coating going away. This particular tank was probably 10 to 15 years old. It might have been as well as 20. This is the dollar plate. This is where all the structural steel comes together to support the roof, and it was just completely and utterly corroded. This is a new system where we actually had to completely take the structure apart and rebuild it. We were able to recoat the steel tank, the sides, so we basically only had to do the roof structure.
Plus approximately how long it takes to
do this?
Yeah, to get in that condition?
Anywhere from 6 to 8 months. A lot of the work is the fabrication ahead of time, but the construction usually is 6 months max around now for the whole.
No,
How long it takes to
for it
corrode.
to
Oh, for it to
deteriorate.
corrode? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. It can take anywhere from a year to 20 years. It just depends on how much the steel is exposed to the water and air. So if you have a pinhole that is in the coating, it could start to corrode a little bit right away. And that's not necessarily good, but it starts to spread underneath the coating. So if the coating is still good and it's not deteriorated, you may not see corrosion for 15 or 20 years. But it can start to corrode almost immediately.
So that's why in her program, we're going back during the warranty period after the year or so and going back and looking at coatings and trying to see what's happened over that year to have the contractor then address that before he's done with the contract.
About how long do you typically have a warranty?
1 year.
1 year?
1 year is our warranty on most construction projects. We do have for other facilities, not steel tanks or concrete reservoirs, longer, but for this type of facility, usually a year is good enough. But we do go into the steel tanks every 3 years and do what we do call find and fix, where we actually look for other things that may not have been caught, or if our cathodic protection system wasn't working correctly, and we go in and make minor repairs that we can do without having to do these huge, where we basically had to rebuild the whole superstructure of the tank.
So what you'll find after the year is you'll start to see the rust spots, the little pinholes, and that's during the warranty period we're going back in and looking at those. And so it'll start to show itself in the smallest form that we can see after that period.
So how do they remedy that?
We basically recoat. They'll go in and do some minor, not usually sandblasting, but they'll roughen up the surface. They'll repaint it a few times and then look at the integrity so that it smooths out and that you don't see any more holes. They'll do some testing to try to make sure that we've completely covered it. But, like with any paint in your house, there's always some kind of little crack or little hole that gets through, which is why we continue to go in. Where we usually see a lot of that is on the floor, because the floors are very difficult to do because you also have to work on the floor. So oftentimes it's the floor where we start to see those pinholes. And then also at the connections. I think the next picture might show it a little better, but if you can kind of see some of those plates. This isn't completely finished. They were going in and touching up some of the plates, but it's really hard to get underneath the joist between the roof, and we often see corrosion there. So a lot of that's where we start to see our initial corrosion, and that's some of the things that we see at the 11-month mark, is that it kind of may have peeled away and it looked good when we finished it, but once it's had water and air and moisture, you start to see some degradation, so then we can go in and touch it up and make sure that it doesn't corrode further. So what this picture is, this is a about 90% rehabilitated structure, similar to the one that you just saw, where we have everything's nice and clean and everything looks coated and nice for water to go in, and hopefully will last for 20 more years with some additional maintenance. We have spent almost $30 million over the last 10 years on our steel tank program. We've done everything from completely replace them to do the kind of major rehabilitation those pictures have showed. And we have another $3.6 million over the next 10 years to continue this program on just our steel tanks, on our 40-some steel tanks that we have in the system. So that brings us into concrete reservoirs. This shows some of the problems that we have with concrete reservoirs, where The roof structure was not fully engaged with the joist wasn't completely on the beam that was supporting it, and we started to see concrete degradation and spalling. And you can see that we have so much degradation here that it's almost like the roof could like start to tip in. And that's what we saw in this particular reservoir, and we actually had to bring in scaffolding so we could take it out of service so we could keep it up. This is more where you could see it's completely just corroding. The water, the concrete just started to erode, just like on a bridge structure. It's very similar to a bridge structure, and you have to completely go in and assess it and rehabilitate it. This particular reservoir was so bad that we tore it down. This was at our Deer Valley plant. We actually had, this was a Shot Creek liner, and we actually had water eroding kind of from both sides of the reservoir and formed a hole on the side. This is another reservoir that we had to completely tear out and start all over at our Deer Valley plant. We just finished that. So these are types of things that we see with the concrete reservoirs. This is 42nd Place. This is located at 42nd Place just south of Baseline. We decided that the best thing to do with this structure was to completely tear it down and start all over. So you're going to see some construction pictures. So we basically did an internal demolition, and we replaced this partly concrete, partly earthen dam with two completely concrete reservoirs. And these pictures show kind of the progression of that. This is us forming up the walls. So it's a round, they're two round circular structures that will be much easier to operate and to maintain and isn't relying on the soil around it. This is looking at it from above. And I think this is the inside liner. We put a liner inside our concrete reservoir because concrete does leak. It is porous. We want to keep our water in our reservoirs. We don't want it to leak out. So with the concrete structures, we do a polyethylene liner to keep the water in. We also have requirements with the state for concrete structures and what kind of leakage you can have. So we spent a lot of work within our concrete program replacing liners and roof structures. And this is the final 42nd Place reservoir from the air. We actually rebuilt some trails for parks on this site. So you could see it went from one big tank with a ballasted roof and rocks and different things like that to these two concrete reservoirs, which give us more flexibility within the water system. Over the last 10 years, we have spent just under $70 million in replacement and rehabilitation of our concrete structures, and we plan on spending another $60 million in rehab and replacement, mostly rehabilitation, over the next 10 years in our concrete system, reservoir system. That's it. If anyone has any questions. As usual.
Councilwoman, if I could just add, it's unusual for me to move forward on a council agenda without some kind of either concrete or steel tank rehabilitation project associated with that agenda. They're very common. And that's because, to your point earlier, we are just continually investing in maintaining and replacing and rehabilitating this infrastructure. So it's a very common item on our agendas. I'm sure, in fact, I think we have some this Wednesday. Or yeah. So you'll see them often. We're always maintaining these reservoirs. They're very important to our system.
For coming and explaining this to us and keeping us up to date on what's going on. Appreciate your good work. Thank you. I think that brings us to citizens' comments. We have one card, Tom Dickinson.
Hi, I'm Tom Dickinson. I live in the Biltmore Park area. I appreciate everybody's time, council members and guests. I appreciate your time. I'm going to go with education. There's a proposal to put bike lanes on Missouri from 24th Street to 19th Avenue. I'll repeat that again. Proposal for bike lanes on Missouri from 24th Street to 19th Avenue. I've been living there 26 years, and I have given this to Ray in the street place. There's a photo of a mark on the curb. I've been there 37 years, and I think I've been thinking about it over the 37 years. I've probably bounced my car off of that curb right there, probably at least a half a dozen times. So the problem with Missouri, its inconsistency with its width inconsistency. And so with or without bike lanes, the hazard is still there. And I can't imagine, you know, there's a tremendous amount of bicycle enthusiasts in Phoenix. They're going to put their friends and everybody that's a bicyclist in jeopardy, because now instead of having, black tires on curbs, you're going to have dead bicyclists, because the hazard is people just drive too fast on Missouri. Well, you put it down to one lane, they're still going to drive too fast because they're wanting to go place, and they're not focused. Because I've bounced off the curb myself a half a dozen times. So I think that Missouri is a constant hazard, and until Missouri, you address the issue of the road hazard, you're going to kill people. What can I say?
Thank you. Thank you for coming down, and Mario happens to oversee streets too, so he can talk to you and we'll make sure it gets on the record. Because I know there are many that agree with you, so. Next, future agenda items. Does anyone need to add anything? No. Hearing none, we're adjourned. Awesome.